So we start today's commemoration and celebration with a song for Eshu Elegua, the Lord of the Crossroads, the Lord of Decisions, the one who navigates the plains between the spiritual world and the human world, and the one that we always invoke at the start of any celebration.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Andrea Girodi, and I'm the Curator of Modern and Contemporary Art at the Allen Memorial Art Museum at Oberlin College, which occupies the land of the Wyandot and Ottawa tribes. I am joined virtually by three of my colleagues on the faculty at Oberlin. Matthew Rary, who you just heard, Assistant Professor of the Arts of Africa and the Black Atlantic in the Department of Art. Charles Peterson, Associate Professor of Africana Studies, and Meredith Gadsby, Associate Professor of Africana Studies and Comparative American Studies. I also want to say a huge thank you to our behind-the-scenes staff, Jill Greenwood and Walker Shadle, who have made this webinar possible. Our conversation today will be a mix of structured and unstructured dialogue. Each of us will start by playing an excerpt of one or two tracks from our playlist, Sounds of the Black Atlantic, which is linked in the chat box. And we'll be linking more references and resources there as we go along, and we would invite all of you to enter comments and questions, which we'll turn to towards the end of our time. We have come together on Juneteenth, a holiday that commemorates the end of enslavement in the United States, specifically the delivery of a proclamation to enslaved Americans in Galveston, Texas, declaring them to be free on June 19, 1865. As many of you will know, that news arrived more than 2 years after Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, and that treacherous delay feels emblematic of the continual deferral of Black liberation from white supremacy that we are still experiencing today. Oberlin, as many of you will know, normally has an incredible celebration of Juneteenth on Tappan Square, which is now scheduled to take place this fall. But today's conversation is part of our virtual celebration, along with the event Black Voices in the Conservatory, also linked in the chat box, which takes place today at 1 p.m. The lasting impacts of the transatlantic slave trade were the subject of the exhibition Afterlives of the Black Atlantic, which Matt Rary and I co-organized for the Allen Memorial Art Museum last fall on the 400th anniversary of the arrival of enslaved Africans to the land that would become the United States. Because of COVID-19, we had to close the show 2.5 months early and cancel our last event, which would have been a lecture and dinner with the food historian Michael W. Twitty. Having to close the exhibition prematurely inspired me and Matt to think about how to expand the scope of the show in ways that we could share virtually. And that led us to create the playlist Sounds of the Black Atlantic on Spotify, together with Professors Peterson and Gadsby. In the spirit of expanding the scope of the exhibition, and I'll show you just a few more images of the show here. I hope a lot of you were able to see it in person. In the spirit of expanding the scope of the show, the first track I want to play for you is a funky Afrofuturist beat. One of the aspects of 20th century Black art that we weren't able to include in the show, much to my chagrin, was Afrofuturism, which is a movement, really an artistic language that crosses over from fiction to visual art to music and poetry and beyond. These are just a few examples of Afrofuturist artworks that I particularly love, and you can find more images from both high art and popular culture on the Tumblr page for the exhibition The Shadows Took Shape, which happened a few years back at the Studio Museum in Harlem, which we've linked in the chat box. These works by Robert Pruitt, Cyrus Kabiru, and Leila Ali, and by Lena Iris Victor and Ellen Gallagher, take elements from the worlds of science fiction, fantasy, magical realism, and Pan-Africanism, and morph them into visions of a future in which the Black diaspora is not just free, but in charge. Our friend Nyama Safia Sandy, who co-organized a Juneteenth Jubilee taking place today, this afternoon in Harlem, again, links in the chat box, wrote this last year about Afrofuturism in a text on Son of Kemet's song, My Queen is Harriet Tubman. Nyama wrote, Afrofuturism is not merely about a narrowly defined aesthetic position or a distant future. It is not about a singular linear view of time. It is a technology for remembering Black peoples in the world. That could be about reckoning with history or visions of an imagined future. It can be an apparatus for recalling those who came before us, not necessarily in direct biological manner, but more so connecting to the spirit or anima of things. It is a tapping into an accumulation of information across space and time. So with that, I'm going to play for you Parliament's Mothership Connection Star Child from 1975, which I think will blast us off into outer space. And if you give me just a second, I'm going to pull up my Spotify for you and get that going.
Well, all right. Star Child, citizens of the universe, recording angels. We have returned to claim the pyramids. Partying on the mothership. I am the Mothership Connection. Getting down in 3D. Light year groove. Well, all right. You hear that noise? Ain't nobody but me and the boys. Get down. Hit it, fellas. Grooving. You gotta hit the band. All right. Star Child here. Put a glide in your stride and a dip in your hip and come on to the mothership. Loose booty, doing the fun. Hustle on over here. Get your head in it, boys. It's just me and the boys getting mad. Gotta get the band. Ain't nothing but a party, y'all. Basic. Even your memories ain't never got this far.
But I want us to hear some more songs in this playlist. These are from my colleagues.
Mothership Connection.
So I'm going to fade that out now. And I'm going to turn things over and stop sharing my screen. I'm going to turn things over to my colleague, Matt Rary.
I think if we all listened to like as long as we wanted to on the songs and we said everything we'd want to say about them, we'd be here a long time. It's all good. So the song that I selected was inspired by one of the works that kind of, for me at least, anchored Afterlives of the Black Atlantic, and that was the monumental installation called Sucker by Jose Rodriguez, the artist based in Harlem. His monumental installation, his altar, and his celebration of the circuits and the diasporas of African religions and Black cultural practices around the Atlantic world. I could talk about this piece for a long time, but the major takeaway for me is that this is an altar to the Virgin of Regla, who is a revered Black Cuban saint in Havana, whose external garb here actually masks her other identity, especially for Black Cubans who are devotees of the Orishas, the Yoruba gods of Nigeria. It masks her other identity as Yemaya, the Yoruba Orisha of motherhood, of the water, who has become critically important in the Black diaspora in the Americas because of her close relationship with the ocean. And so I was thinking about the importance of Yemaya to this piece, the importance of Yemaya to the diaspora, and there's a number of songs in the playlist that are homages to or reference Yemaya. And the one that I wanted to play for you was by Angelique Kidjo. Angelique Kidjo is of Nigerian descent, but was born in Benin, and actually grew up listening to salsa music, as there were many like Cuban salsa bands that were coming through Benin in the 60s. And so she was also noticing like, oh, you know, all people who are singing salsa are coming through are men. It's actually a lot of white men. And when Celia Cruz, the Afro-Cuban singer, came along, who was celebrating her Blackness through salsa, through all the other music she's producing, but at the same time is also taking the time to celebrate the Orishas, which was a big moment for Angelique Kidjo. So last year, Angelique Kidjo came out with an album that was all covers of songs that Celia did, and one of them is to Yemaya. I'll play it for you now. her voice is just so rich and so deep. And it's really striking to me to hear someone who grew up with Yoruba religion in West Africa turning to Afro-Cubans who preserved that religion in diaspora as a way to re-identify with it. Just so.
As some of you who are listening will know, the playlist, when we first shared it a week ago, I think had 70-something songs on it, and it has now swelled to be over 100. And I mean, we can keep adding to this. I was joking the other day that I can imagine, logging into Spotify in 2 years and finding that it's like 300 songs now. But it's, it's something we can keep adding to. And if you have songs that you want to hear, that you want to see added to the list, I can see Johnny wants to play Roberta Flack's "Oh Freedom." Let me see if I can get it for you.
Oh yeah.
But why don't you tee up something too?
Okay, my next song is teed up.
All right, you go ahead and I'll pull this up.
Okay. So this is a song by Jorge Benjor, who's a popular Brazilian musician who rose to prominence in the 1960s and 1970s and was really the first popular Brazilian musician to talk about being Black in Brazilian popular music. And so this is a song called Zumbi from 1974 that he wrote in the context of a number of kind of Black consciousness organizations emerging in Brazil. He also wrote it in the context of a military dictatorship that was really suppressing any movement against them. And the song is about, I've translated the lyrics into English, and I think those can be posted in the chat. The song is about an auction. It's about a slave auction. And each of the people are sort of narrating their experience and waiting for this figure named Zumbi, who is a critically important anti-colonial and maroon leader in Brazil, sort of waiting to see, like, this is what's going to happen when he finally arrives.
Estão os homens, do lado cana de açúcar, do outro lado cafezal, ao centro senhores sentados, vendo a colheita do algodão branco, sendo colhidos por mãos negras. Eu quero ver, eu quero ver, eu quero ver, eu quero ver. Quando o zumbi chegar, o que vai acontecer? Zumbi é senhor das guerras, é senhor das demandas. Quando o zumbi chega, é zumbi que manda. Zumbi é senhor das guerras, é senhor das demandas. Quando o zumbi chega.
I love that song. There's a critical point in that, for those who are reading the lyrics, who's talking about there are these white men who are sitting in between a sugar plantation and a coffee plantation. And Brazil was a sugar colony for a long time, and then it was a coffee colony. So there's something in the song that's implying that Zumbi never arrived. We're still waiting for him. We're still waiting for that liberation. Should we go to the next song?
Yeah, I think we should pass it off to Charles. Welcome back.
Hi, everyone. I'd like to thank Matthew and Andrea for putting this together. Again, thank them for curating this amazing exhibit and this great idea for the Spotify playlist. Certainly my encounter with the exhibit, sort of in the title Afterlives of the Black Atlantic, sparked a lot of my sort of earlier encounters in grad school back in the 90s with the concept of the Black Atlantic, whether it be Robert Farris Thompson's book, Flash of the Spirit, or Gilroy's book, Black Atlantic, and even the historiography of Marcus Rediker and Peter Linebaugh, right? That concept always flows and follows me as I think about teaching and think about the diaspora. And so when I saw this, what jumped into my mind was water, right? I mean, for me, that is, and there are a lot of powerful themes that, to borrow someone else's pun, flow through this. But water is the most prominent for me. And as we began to assemble the playlist, I kind of tapped into my own background, my own sort of history, son of a migrant from Mississippi, raised in the Black Baptist Church. And what first popped into my mind was the old spiritual Wade in the Water. And that's really one of the first songs that I put on the playlist. And I want to sort of think about water and what water means to me and what water came to mean to me through the song and as well through the exhibit. And I think it's mythopoetic sort of position within the Black Atlantic in terms of a very real, a very literal sort of phenomenon, crossing the water, the 6-week journey, in terms of the political meanings that water has taken, and those political meanings wrapped up within sort of spiritual and religious sort of tones, the idea of crossing over Jordan into the Promised Land, and how that sort of symbolically overlaps with the Underground Railroad moving north, but also just a larger attempt to gain freedom that has been the 400-year history of African peoples within the Western Hemisphere. But even deeper layers, we think about like my own tradition of baptism, the literal immersion in the water, the spiritual and the cleansing properties of water within many African and African diasporic traditions, and certainly the ways in which many West African spiritual systems have those same types of practices. So the ways in which there's a circularity, there's an always sort of already present sort of position of water, the repetition of certain type of ritual practices and beliefs and positioning of water within the diaspora. So to me, amazing, Wade in the Water became very central to that. And I chose, let me go ahead and at least show you my image, because when you work with art historians, they always have images, so you have to come prepared. Right, I'll show you this baptism, photograph of a baptism from North Carolina at the turn of the 20th century. So I chose the song, once again, Wade in the Water, and I specifically chose the version done by the Fisk Jubilee Singers. And I chose it because of, I think, this is one of the songs that brought the Fisk Jubilee Singers to prominence. They sort of really sort of exposed the song, right, transformed it, and exposed it to a larger American public. And I like the historicity of it because it's still at the moment, newly freed from enslavement, right, the freed people. And to me, it's probably the most, sort of the most powerful sort of expression of the way in which water functions within the consciousness of the freed people at this moment in the late 19th century. So Andrea, if you could go ahead and give us a few minutes of that, I'd really appreciate it. In the water, children, in the water, God's gonna trouble the water. Everybody, wade in the water, wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. Wade in the water, wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. I looked over Jordan and what did I see? God's gonna trouble the water. Another angel coming after me. God's gonna trouble the water. They're gonna take me to the heavenly land. God's gonna trouble the water. It's a big gold and it's gonna God's gonna trouble the water. Wade in the water. Wade in the water, children. Wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. Some say I've never been redeemed. God's gonna trouble the water. Just follow me down to Jordan Stream. God's gonna trouble the water.
I'll tell you how the Lord has set my soul free. God's gonna trouble the water. And when I get to heaven, God's gonna trouble the water. Wade in the water. Wade in the water.
All right, thank you for that. That triggered a few Sunday mornings of my childhood, right there. But like I said, the power of that song, the multivalent sort of meanings of water, political, spiritual, physical sort of realities. Yeah, thanks. I'll pass it on now to Meredith Gadsby, Associate Professor of Africana Studies.
Thank you. Great. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I am outdoors at my house. I apologize in advance for the periodic car sounds and outdoor noises, and the possibility of the sound of a lawnmower that might pop up. So I come to this work humbly, right, as a professor of Africana Studies who specializes in literature. So my areas are African, African American, and Caribbean literatures, and much of my scholarship sits at the intersections of those traditions. And so one of the songs that I asked to have included on the playlist for this event was Lauryn Hill's Everything is Everything. And one of the reasons that I chose that text is because, that the text, the lyrics, so I traffic in text, right? So the kind of oral, O-R-A-L, the aural, A-U-R-A-L, text of this piece is because in many ways I think it encapsulates much of what I'm feeling about this particular historical moment, the meaning of Juneteenth, the meaning of Juneteenth specifically to Black communities, and more specifically Black women, and also how we engage in discussions of kind of enslavement, emancipation, freedom, and the humanity, the persistent declaration of the humanity of Black peoples internationally, right? So in the context of Juneteenth, but in the broader context that the afterlives of the Black Atlantic experience really wants to focus on and address visually, right? And so if we could hear Lauryn Hill's Everything is Everything, I think that would be great.
Yo, we about to check all the kids, the mothers, the fathers, the brothers, the sisters, you know, the regular. Everything is everything, everything. What is meant to be. After winter, must come spring. Change it comes eventually. Everything is everything. What is meant to be. Understand that everything is everything. After winter, must come spring. Change it comes eventually. I wrote these words for everyone who struggles in their youth, who won't accept deception instead of what is true. It seems we lose the game before we even start to play. Who made these rules? We're so confused. Easily led astray. Let me tell you that everything is everything. Everything is everything. Everything is everything. Everything. After winter, possibly speak tongues. Beat drums at the City Young Street Baptist. Rap this and violin it. From the beginning, my practice extending across the atlas. I begat this, flipping them together on the dirty mattress. You can't match this. Rapper slash actress, more powerful than two Cleopatras. Bomb graffiti on the tomb of Nefertiti. MCs ain't ready to take it to the Serengeti. My rhymes is heavy like the mind of Sister Betty. El Boogie spars with stars and constellations. Then came down for a little conversation. Adjacent to the king, fear no human being. Roll with cherubims to Nassau Coliseum. Now hear this mixture with hip hop meets scripture. Develop a negative into a positive picture. Everything is everything. What is meant to be will be meant to be will be. Must come spring, must come spring. Change it comes eventually, Sometimes it seems we'll touch that dream, but things come slow and not at all. And the ones on top won't make it stop. So convinced this day might fall. Let's love ourselves and we can fail to make a better situation. Tomorrow, our seeds will grow. All we need is dedication. Let me tell you, everything is everything. Everything is everything. Everything is everything. Everything is everything. After winter comes spring. Everything is everything. Everything is everything. Everything is everything. Is everything. What is meant to be will be. Is meant to be. After winter comes spring. Must come spring. Change it comes eventually. Change comes eventually. La 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 la.
Okay, great. Thank you. So why that song? To do a little bit of kind of lyrical analysis here. So one of the reasons that I selected that piece is because for me, it's a more contemporary song, obviously. And it speaks directly, I think, to young people. And when the song was first recorded, I was in my 20s. And one of the things that I've been finding with my students is that Lauryn Hill is one of the artists who persistently pops up for them in terms of thinking about inspirational music to help them theorize and understand the present moment that we're in. So first of all, to respond to Matt's opening, right? The fact that this event opens with an invocation of Elegua or Eshu Elegba, a request to kind of open the door for us spiritually, I think is really important. The idea of everything being everything is one that is persistent, I believe, in African diasporic ritual and tradition. It talks about the importance of balance, right? I think about the Loa Dambala, for instance, and Aida Wedo, who are present in the Haitian Vodun pantheon of deities, which Loa is in Vodun what one would call Orisha, and how the two of them taken together represent the idea of balance. Again, as it is above, it is below. And I think that that idea of balance speaks really importantly to the idea of spiritual and emotional wellness, particularly for Black people, for Black communities, and in terms of thinking about wellness. One of the things that I focused on in terms of thinking about this exhibition is the importance of art as a tool, right, and as a space for healing. So I'm thinking about this kind of broader discussion of self-care that is trafficked in multiple ways, right? But in many ways is being utilized in the present discussion about social activism as a return to thinking about the emotional health and wellness of Black people internationally. And it's not a narrative that is new, right? Audre Lorde talks about the importance of wellness and taking care of oneself, taking care of ourselves as a revolutionary act. She writes about that specifically in the Cancer Journals when she herself is talking about prioritizing her wellness. Toni Cade Bambara writes about it in the novel The Salt Eaters, where she talks specifically about the experiences of Black women activists trying to hold on to themselves and create a space of wellness and healing in political movements designed to support and fight for social justice of Black people, even as Black women are dealing with misogyny and sexism within various movements. I think about as well the different ways in which African people create joy or experience joy or express joy, even in the midst of trauma. So Lauryn Hill's Everything and Everything is Everything reminds us that even in the midst of struggle, right, there is the possibility of hope. And there is a possibility for hope that is possible in the midst of constant struggle. So then struggle doesn't become a space of trauma. It becomes a space of anticipation, of optimism, of the possibility of being victorious, right? And I think that's really important. So for instance, in 1993, in Toni Morrison's Nobel laureate lecture, there are many quotes that are circulating, pulled from that lecture. And one of them is, we die, that might be the meaning of life, but we do language, and that may be the measure of our lives. In that same lecture, she says, though, that language can never pin down slavery, genocide, or war, nor should it yearn for the arrogance to be able to do so. Its force, its felicity is in its reach towards the ineffable. So then, where words fail, what other forms do African people use? What other languages do we use to declare our humanity? And I would argue, that art is that space. I think this exhibition speaks to the power of art as not just therapy, but as a kind of a political space, or a space where activism and politics are made sacred, right? It's a sacred space for processing and healing. And there is not a single traumatic experience that peoples of African descent and Africans have not experienced that out of which an artistic form hasn't emerged. But I think it's also important to note that pre-colonial African societies created art as well that was both practical and aesthetically appealing. So there's a whole history of Africans that doesn't sit within the context of trauma. And I think it's important to remember that. I think it's important for us to remember that in diaspora, but it's also important for us to think about that within the fullness of understanding African and African inspired art. And also to think, though, that in the afterlife of the Black Atlantic, there is great trauma. And at the same time, there's the insistence on claiming a humanity, even in a larger society that seems to leave little room for that. And so to speak to Charles Peterson's position or assertion as we think about water as a metaphor, there is another selection that I chose, but I'm going to pull back a bit so that he can present as well. I think the other piece, I'm not sure, Charles, if there was another song that you wanted to share, or should I continue and then return to you? I think you might.
I'm just flowing.
Okay.
No, wherever this goes, it goes. We'll follow wherever it goes. So.
Okay, so I'll just finish since we were talking about water and blue. There's so much in the Afterlives space. I want to call it a space, if you will. I think it's in many ways a ritualized space. When I was talking to Jose Rodriguez about Sucker I took my class to see him installing the piece. And we got the chance to talk to him and ask him questions about it. And as a native New Yorker, we vibed around the title of the piece, Sucker, right? So sucker, as we know, could be a source of support in terms of thinking about Yemanya and invoking her and the Virgin Mary in the interest of getting spiritual food, right? Spiritual sustenance to move forward. Like you invoke her as a mother who provides comfort. At the same time, he argued that it was a play on the word sucka, which, and I say sucka, S-U-C-K-A, as a native New Yorker, and we vibed on that. He was saying like, nobody wants to be called a sucker. And it's true, because a sucker is a dupe, is a fool, someone who's manipulated or manipulable. And what I love about this piece is that it invokes so much the play on African spiritual practice, African traditions, and kind of international Black linguistic strategies for survival, right? The importance of holding on to spiritual traditions, right? Invoking Yemanya and moving Yemanya into a new world spiritual space in which she can masquerade, if you will, as the Virgin Mary, while she is also something else, but she could be both of those kind of sacred spaces of support at the same time. Also thinking about sweetness in terms of a history of enslavement and sugar, as sucker as in a lollipop, although that's what they're called in the Midwest. In New York, we call them lollipops, right? There's that, but also thinking about the persistence not to be duped, right? Like Lauryn Hill talks about who made these rules were so confused, right? To think about the insistence on not being a sucker, not being tricked into losing that which reminds us of who we are, right? And I think Juneteenth and that journey towards freedom and talking about that journey towards freedom is a really important space in the kind of North American space, but also it speaks to a larger history of the struggles towards social justice in emancipation in different parts of the African diasporic world. I also think that it reminds us of the contradictions of freedom, right, in this space and others, and in terms of our experiences in the West, and also thinking about post-colonial experiences on the continent of Africa, right? The contradictions of independence, right? The contradictions of freedom, and thinking about Haiti as well, specifically the contradictions of between unfreedom and freedom in a hemisphere that is persistently committed to reminding us that we were brought into this space in the context of unfreedom, and that there was never a plan for us to be autonomous, right, and fully free. And so I think you see that in the examples of state-sanctioned violence against Black people, that reminds us of the kind of national, in terms of the US, and national refusal to fully embrace Black humanity. So we see that now in our most recent examples of the murder of Breonna Taylor, the murder of George Floyd, Sandra Bland, Michelle Cusseau, Botham Jean, Amadou Diallo, Abner Louima. Abner Louima lived, but also is someone who in New York City was beaten almost to the point of death, right, while in police custody. India Kager, and so many others who have been abused and or murdered at the hands of the state. We note as well that many of these murders are of Black women, and many of those murders of Black women become eclipsed in ways that highlight the intersections of racism and misogyny. And so circling back to the exhibition, I see in many of those pieces a discussion of, an elevation of, not just the centrality of thinking about the kind of traumatic experiences of the afterlife, but the centrality or the centering, if you will, of Black joy, right? The persistence of talking about Black joy, and the ability to transcend suffering whilst at the same time actively engaging in social protest. So I'll stop there.
No, thank you for that, Meredith, because I think one of the things that Matt and I, and Matt, you can jump in and say more if you want, or correct me. One of the things that we most wanted to come through that exhibition was that complexity and tension of navigating a traumatic historical past and a traumatic present, but also the beauty and joy and sheer immensity of creative content that comes through in all of the artworks that we wanted to include. And that is all a beautiful thing, even if it's navigating traumas of various kinds.
And I think it was so important to us to select works that really brought those two into deep and intimate conversation in their relationship, because so often Black joy is commercialized and marketed in ways that obscure Black struggle, right? And seek to minimize it or eliminate it. But one of the things, and I think Meredith, you spoke to this so beautifully, one of the things is that it's that joy and its celebration both emerges from, is counter to, is deeply interweaved with that ongoing struggle and the ongoing possibility of freedom, of emancipation, and the joy that emerges from it.
Charles, should we play your track?
Yeah, we can. You know what? Actually, I'm sorry. I'm going to do this to you.
That's okay.
I actually want to go. Yeah, I'll stick with the Mos Def track, New World Water. Yeah.
Okay.
I thought about the Wyclef Jean, but we can go with the Mos Def.
Okay.
There's nothing more refreshing than having a clear, crisp, clean glass of water on a warm summer's day. That cool, refreshing drink. Try it with your friends. New World water make the tide rise high. Come inland and make your house go by. Fools done upset the old man river. Made him carry slave ships and fed him dead niggas. Now his belly full and he about to flood something. So I'm throwing rope that ain't tied to nothing. Tell your crew use the H2 and wise them out. It's the New World water and every drop counts. You can laugh and take it as a joke if you wanna, but it don't rain a full week some summers. And it's about to get real wild in the half. You be buying every yard just to take a fucking bath. Heads is acting wild, sipping raw, pumping dank. Competing with the next man for higher playing rank. And I ain't got time trying to be Big Hank. Fuck a bank, I need a 20-year water tank. Cause while these knuckleheads inside get sweating they goods, the sun is sitting in the treetops, burning the woods. And as the flame from the blaze get higher and higher, they say, don't drink the water, we need it for the fire. New York is drinking it. The whole of California is drinking it. Way up north and down south is drinking it. Used to have minerals and zinc in it. Now they say it got lead and stink in it. Fluorocarbons and monoxide. Push the water table lopside. Used to be free, now of course you will feed. Cause all tanks till they notice they roll across the sea. Man, you gotta cook with it, baby, clean with it. When it's hot summertime, you fiend for it. You gotta put it in the iron, you steaming with. That's what they dress wounds and treat diseases with. The rich and poor, black and white got need for it. And everybody in the world can agree with this. Consumption promotes health and easiness. Go too long without it on this earth and you leaving it. Americans wasting it on some leisure shit. Another nation be desperately seeking it. Bacteria washing up on their beaches. Say, don't drink the water so they can't wash their feet with it. Young babies in perpetual neediness. Epidemics hopping up the petri dish. Control center shot to play all secret. To avoid public panic and freakiness. There are places where TB is common as TV. Cause foreign-based companies go and get greedy. The type of cats who pollute the whole shoreline. Have it purified and sell it for $1.25. Now the world is drinking it. Your mom's white and baby girl is drinking it. Up north and down south is drinking it. You just have to go to your sink for it. The cash register's going to chink for it.
Thank you, Andrea. That song I chose because I wanted to continue sort of my ideas and my thinking, or sort of how the theme of water was so apparent to me, obviously everyone, but so powerful for me with the exhibit. And I thought about this song, and Mos Def, or now known as Yasiin Bey, like Lauryn Hill, was an artist still is a working artist, but at that moment in the late 1990s and the early 2000s, was one of the artists who I think did an amazing job of reframing how hip hop was thinking about Black history, Black culture. Certainly his work with the group Black Star. And this particular song, when I remember first hearing it, so struck me. And as the years have moved on, almost 20 years later, it's even more powerful in that he's framing water in so many different complex and certainly for when the album came out in 1999, 2000, really prophetic ways, right? So whereas my first selection, Wade in the Water, was one that thought about the deep sort of historical and spiritual relationship of African diasporic peoples to water, African peoples to water. Mos Def for Yasin Bey, for me, sort of links to that history where he talks about feeding dead niggers into the Atlantic Ocean, but he pulls it into a very problematic sort of relationship to the contemporary moment. And there are these amazing moments in the song where he looks at the ways in which the environment has been despoiled by corporate abuse, right? Defiling the water. And this is, right, years before we know about what's happening in Flint, Michigan. He talks about the corporatization of water, right? The ways that corporations are now selling water for $1.99 in his various stores. He talks about sort of the environmental appropriation, the disparities in access to such a fundamental sort of resource on the planet, right? Americans are wasting it on some leisure shit, or right, countries not able to get it, or the ways in which, right, because of lack of water, we see disease. So it is a necessary song. It's a song that I think was certainly a wake-up call. This is before we began to think about the effects of climate change, before it became a part of the popular discourse, right? He talks about sort of the hurricanes eating up shorelines. He's talking about sort of these droughts that are taking place and the lack of water. And so for me, it became such an amazing performance on his part, and one that still has amazing levels of resonance, right? And the tragedy of it all is that, once again, this is such a central sort of element and such a central symbol within the African diaspora. And to see this song, which is accounting all the ways in which it's being despoiled, all the way in which it's being abused, right? That this source, which once was used to purify us, once used to sort of give us a symbol for freedom and hope and liberty, now becomes a source of infection and disease, now becomes something that is used to enslave us in this sort of commercial and corporate sort of, trying to find the right word to finish this thought, cycle of exploitation, right, if you will, right, having to pay for such a fundamental sort of resource. And, you know, and as I'm talking about this, I think about, I had a friend who was working for Solomon Smith Barney back in the late 90s, and he told me, if you were smart, you would invest in water. Because this is when corporations had begun to buy the water, the groundwater rights from farmers in the Southwest and in the Midwest. And now I think about how right now in sort of the Sahelian region of West Africa, we have sort of corporations and foreign governments which are buying the groundwater rights from beneath the farms, right? And lowering the water tables, right? And how it's not benefiting that water, which is a part of the natural resource heritage of the continent, is not being used, right? So the ways in which water historically, contemporarily has been turned against African peoples, right? Who've for so long seen it as such a vital part of their lives. You think about the river networks that flow through West Africa, right? So that song is just a world, of a universe, a cosmos of meaning and thinking about water for me.
Absolutely. I want to just say that we're coming up on 1 p.m. already. Somehow the hour just completely flew by. I don't know how we're here. But we're going to go until about 1:15 or so. So people who want to stick around and chat with us a little bit more, we are happy to take questions that you put in the Q&A box. We saw a question from Annie Storr that Meredith has answered right there. But if other folks have questions or comments, feel free to throw them in. And otherwise, we'll just continue the conversation until about 1:15.
I wanted to add something. I was thinking there's another piece that I'm not going to ask to share the music in the interest of time. I also included Courtney Bryan's Wade in the Water, which is another iteration of that song, for a couple of reasons. Courtney is an alum and is an amazing composer who has just, done wonderful things in terms of thinking about activism, Black women, Black activism, and the elevation of Black women composers. And I think at a place like Oberlin, it's important to talk about that too, right? Courtney just recently, I believe it was in Maryland, I could be mistaken, but worked with a group of school-age children and invited them to bring sounds into the classroom that sounded like music to them. And she used that piece, she used those pieces in a larger composition that she recorded. And I think this particular recording of Wade in the Water resonates with me in so many ways, because I think about the different ideas, the different ways in which we talk about water, many of which Charles just discussed. But I also want to talk about consumption. So there's a piece in the exhibit, I forget what it's called, that's made with blue candy. And I think it's a wonderful piece because it invites engagement, a different type of engagement from museum goers. And even the Rodriguez piece does as well. As he was installing it, he told me that in other places that he's installed it, like he's invited people to walk inside of it. And there is a wonderful series of vevés, I guess you would call them, which are kind of sacred sculptures, I guess, if you will, that can be drawn with chalk or painted, and he uses coins with them, for them, pennies. And he says that he likes the back and forth because museum goers then kind of disrupt that, those formations, and then the piece becomes even more organic as people engage with it. The piece with that is reminiscent of the ocean, that is made of candy, invites a certain type of consumption. I think that makes me as a museum goer very uncomfortable, and many of us in Africana Studies discussed why it made us uncomfortable, because there's a way in which folks are invited to consume sweetness as represented by Black bodies in a way that makes us very uncomfortable. So we see in the present this kind of consumption, this devouring of Black bodies in terms of murder and abuse and violence. And then we think about the theft of Black bodies and the ways in which, in some ways, although water and blue can be a comforting space, it can also be a place of predation, right? That has consumed enslaved people, pulled into that space across the Atlantic. So the Sea Book is a place of it's an energizing space. It's a space of support and succor, but it's also a place of incredible foreboding, I think, for Africans and peoples of African descent. And the idea of people being able to consume that sweetness in a way made many of us uncomfortable. And I think of all the different ways in which we persistently wade in that water, right? We wade in it spiritually, we wade in it emotionally, we wade in it psychologically. We still use it in terms of our kind of sacred offerings, and also in the idea of washing ourselves clean of sin, while at the same time thinking about rebirth, spiritual rebirth. And so I'm wondering, how we talk about the engagement of folks with this kind of history, thinking about an afterlife of the Black Atlantic, as we are actually not in an afterlife. We are still in the midst of grappling with all of that. So I'm wondering, it's just a question I'd like to throw out to all of us, to people who are on Zoom watching this, and also to our panelists today. Kind of a heavy question, sorry, but I was just thinking about that as we were talking about all of this. I think it's worthwhile to think about that, right? As we think about consumption in a number of ways. I think many of the pieces in the exhibition deal with the kind of consumption of Black history in a particular kind of way too.
I mean, I think, well, and it's a big question, and I'll take a nibble on it. Certainly, I think thinking about sort of in terms of establishing a Black Atlantic, like the first product of that is like, the Black bodies coming out of Africa. And then they spur other sort of consumable products. And I'm trying to think about how to address the dilemma of that. I mean, are you suggesting that there's a dilemma in terms of that consumption of the Black body within this? Yeah.
I think there's a huge contradiction there. There's, like a commodification of and a consumption of Black people and Black culture that I think the exhibition signals to as well, particularly that piece. And I think that was the intention of the artists. And that's why I think I like that that piece so much, because it changes over time. And I also had to fight my own academic self-policing and not wanting to touch it and wanting it to stay kind of pristine in a particular way, moving away from the artist's intention too. And so I like provocative work. I like work that makes you uncomfortable. And I gravitate towards that in a number of ways because it does make me uncomfortable, because I think that it deals with the issue of sweetness and power, right? To pull in like Philip Curtin, historian Philip Curtin, how we engage Black culture and Black history, and how Black people, right, frame, how we often don't even get to frame the way that works. And then when we do to frame it as both insiders and outsiders, how others engage that work. I mean, it's not a question that we have to answer now, but it was just something that came up for me as I went through again to look at the pieces, because unfortunately we can't go in to look at them, as I would like. And so as I'm looking at them online, right, in 1D, it is really interesting to think about that, I think, in terms of the larger context of the moment in which we're living, right? When we see how art is in constant dialogue with our present day realities, I think is really important.
So Meredith, for me, you really nailed the point that the title of the exhibition is in some ways kind of eliding the reality that we're not in an afterlife, right?
Still here, right?
Yeah, right. We live in the realities and the deep histories of the Black Atlantic. And I think one of the things about that piece, you noted about how it potentially invites a viewer who may be trained in a certain kind of way of moving through a museum, through an institutional space, a way of looking at certain objects in institutional space, to kind of occupy another position, to sort of play with those kind of expectations of self-performance. But it's also a piece that, in asking us if we want to take that candy, is reflecting on a decision that so many of us make every day, right? There's a reason that Americans consume so much sugar. There's a reason that Cubans consume so much sugar. There's a reason that Brazilians consume so much sugar. And we can delve into that and talk about food insecurity and talk about what communities have access to foods that aren't oversweetened, that aren't processed, that aren't based on sugar. We can talk about how sugar plantations still exist, right? And in some cases are still being worked by the descendants of the enslaved Africans who were brought to work on them hundreds of years ago, the same plantations, right? So processing all of that, like the ease with which we consume these commodities should make us deeply uncomfortable. And I think that piece puts that decision on a viewer and on someone engaging with it so strongly, but in this way that can seem, I don't want to phrase this, almost, that can seem too easy.
Well, yeah, and when Meredith was talking, I was thinking about how, I think there's a lot of talk in general about the ways in which Americans consume Black culture but don't care about Black people. Right. And that we consume it just like anything else without really thinking about what it means and the culture of which it's a part. And I just distinctly, I had this image as Meredith was talking, I had this moment right after Trump was elected in 2016, where I was living in LA, then it was before I came to Oberlin, and someone pulled up next to me in a car with a Trump bumper sticker blasting Kendrick Lamar. And I just kind of stood there like mind blown, just thinking how do these things coexist? And the fact that they seem to coexist so easily and so often in this country, it doesn't to me say that work, like Kendrick's work, is not powerful. It is. But white supremacy is more powerful still in some ways. And I think living in those contradictions and trying just to square those things in my head, I don't I don't know, but that was the image that I had when Meredith was talking about consumption and the way that work makes us uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, now that, Meredith's question is, I'm understanding it better, it makes me think of, and I apologize, I forget the name of the exhibit, but it's the one devoted to Sarah Bartman, right? And thinking about sort of being trapped within this frame of being the product, of being consumed, sort of not having a voice or a position by which to completely reshape that, right? And watching yourself be used as a product, watching yourself be used, right, for these goods. Hey, sweetie.
Hi, Daddy.
How are you?
Good.
So I'm always sort of struggling with trying to figure out how to move beyond that frame. How do sort of African peoples put themselves in a position to be in more control over the observation or the projection or the presentation of who we are, what we do, and what we're going to do, right?
Yeah, and that's historically been a real struggle in the music world, right? Because the gatekeepers have traditionally been white producers, white label owners, who are making this music available, but also dictating how it's marketed, what we actually get to hear, what radio stations receive singles, et cetera, that have really determined, in part, the world of music. And we've seen that kind of explode as the system has had to respond to the internet and the way that music has moved around the internet, in ways that nobody could have predicted before, Napster hit the scene. And we had a question earlier about, where is African diaspora collaboration happening? And Meredith's answer in the Q&A box really centered on not just institutions like the Studio Museum in Harlem and the National Museum of African American History and Culture in DC, but also the internet, these collaborations are happening virtually. And I wonder if we want to say any more about that as we move towards closing out our virtual Juneteenth celebration. I know that's a big question too, is how the intersection of Black culture and the internet.
But not just the internet. So I think I'm going to leave the internet aside for a second. But one of the other things that I think the playlist makes clear is Black music has always emerged out of and in conversation between so many different nodes and so many different locations, right? So I'm thinking like the group that sang the song for Elegua at the beginning. So they're of Afro-Cuban descent. They grew up in Paris, and there's an interview with them that I think we can link them to the chat box, where they're just walking through a vinyl shop in Paris. And they're pulling out all of the influences that bring to what they call their kind of contemporary spirituals. And it's Nina Simone, Mary J. Blige, Angelique Kidjo, the Fugees, Miriam Makeba, like the diversity of artists that are now sort of so widely available actually isn't a new thing. Like those kinds of cross-Atlantic collaborations have been happening for centuries.
Yeah.
Centuries. And people are only starting to catch up. White audiences are only starting to catch up to that reality now.
I completely agree with you. I think artists, musicians, and multiple types of artists and multiple mediums have been doing this work for centuries, and it's the scholars who are late to catch up.
Mm-hmm.
So you think about collaborations between jazz musicians, you think about like Dizzy Gillespie's collaborations, the late Marcus Belgrave, who was a professor of trumpet here at Oberlin College. I remember when I first met Mr. Belgrave, I approached him and I introduced myself, and I said to him, Belgrave is a very Barbadian last name. I wonder if you have any family from Barbados. And he said, my entire family's from Barbados. In fact, unlike many people who left Barbados in the 20s and such, in the early part of the 20th century and went to the coast, who went to New York, who went to Miami. He's like, my family went into Pennsylvania. We went to work in mines. And here is this man who's first generation American, whose family's Barbadian, grew up in a family of musicians, and is a jazz musician. So we think about somebody like Malcolm X. Malcolm X's mother was from Grenada. She was an activist in her own right? Was involved in activism in Grenada and was a Garveyite and came and met another Garveyite in the United States. I think there are all these diasporic connections that many of us don't know about or think about, even as we talk about Black liberation movement and struggle, and how many of these activists and artists and thinkers were in constant dialogue with one another, right? And I think you see that in this exhibit in a way that I think is wonderful, right? So when Lauryn Hill talks about, you know, again, that line, who made these rules, you know, we're so confused. There's a lot of confusion, I think, among scholars, but I think also in the Black Atlantic world, there's a lot of confusion as well as a result of colonialism. And I feel that this work like this does the important work of pulling together what we kind of already know culturally, but putting it in one place so that we can see and learn from it in a really important way. And to think about how we really need to think about the work of artists as a really important and valid space of scholarship as well, a different type of scholarship in which we get to read different types of texts. I think about Vivek Clark's discussion of diaspora literacy, how we get to read multiple simultaneous traditions that are African-based in dialogue with each other, as opposed to seeing them in isolation.
Well, I think that might be a good note to end on. As much as I would love to keep talking, I know we don't want to overstay our time with everyone who's joined us, but I do want to play, Johnny Coleman sent us a recommendation for a song to end on. So thank you, Johnny. We're going to end on the song Umi Says by Mos Def.
Yay. Thanks, Johnny.
Thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
I don't wanna write this down. I wanna tell you how I feel right now. I don't wanna take no time to write this down. I wanna tell you how I feel right now. Hey, tomorrow may never come. For you or me, life is not a problem. Tomorrow may never show up. For you or me, this life is not a problem. I ain't no perfect man, I'm trying to do the best that I can with what it is I have. I ain't no perfect man, I'm trying to do the best that I can with what it is I have. Put my heart and soul to the song. I hope you feel me from where I am to wherever you are. In that city, tomorrow may never come. For you and me, life is not promised. Tomorrow may never appear. You better hold this very moment, very close to you right now. Very close to you right now. So close to you right now. So don't be afraid. Let it shine. My woman said, shine your light on the world. Shine your light for the world to see. My hobby said, shine your light on the world. Shine your light for the world to see. My hobby said, shine your light on the world. Shine your light for the world to see. My hobby said, shine your light on the world. Shine your light for the world to see. Sometimes I get discouraged. I look around and things are so weak. People are so weak. Time to feel like crying. Sometimes my heart gets heavy. Sometimes I just wanna leave and fly away. Sometimes I don't know what to do with myself. Passion takes
like a man, going insane, use the brain, trying to maintain everything. Hey, hey, hey. Put my heart and soul into this show. Hope you feel me when I am, so when I are. Sometimes I don't want to be bothered. Sometimes I just want to quiet life. Me and my baby, me and my lady. Sometimes I don't want to get in the snowball. Sometimes I don't want to be so black. Sometimes I just want to be mad. Movement says, shine your light on the world. Shine your light for the world to see. My hobby says, shine your light on the world. Shine your light for the world to see. I'm a black people. My dreamer says, shine your light on the world. Shine your light for the world to see. My elders say, shine your light on the world. Shine your light for the world to see. I want black people to be free, to be free, to be free. For my people to be free, to be free, to be free. For my people to be free, to be free, to be free. For black people to be free, that's all that be free. That's all that's me. 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 To be free, to be free. Black people unite. Let's all get that. Cause I had a love. Said it won't all one life. One man, one voice, one mic. Like unite. Come on, do it right. Like unite. Come on, do it right. Like unite. Come on, get down. Have love. Love peace and understanding. Oh, one voice, one life. One man, one shine my light. Like unite. Come on, do it right. Like unite. Come on, do it right. Like unite. Black people, black people, black people, black people, black people, black people.
All right. Whoop. Spotify wants to keep it going.
There's nothing more refreshing than having a clear, crisp,
All right, folks. Have a good afternoon.
what a warm summer.
Have a good Juneteenth.
That cool, refreshing drink. Try it with your friends.